Good afternoon. My name is Sally Torgerman, and I'm Managing Director of the PwC's Lead Advisory Practice within the Energy team. As many of you know, I've spent my career 19 years following the electron, first as an electrical engineer, then as a lawyer, and more recently as an advisor. But it really, nothing gives me more pleasure to panel this next session than my love for Jules Verne. And so for many of you who have read the book, The Mysterious Island, will see it is an absolute dream come true to see over 400 of all of us here considering how to make hydrogen a reality. I'll be moderating the discussion today with our panel this afternoon and taking your questions from the audience. And firstly, I'd like to thank all of our speakers for their comments and welcome our two new panellists, Maya Schweizer, CEO of CleanCo. Welcome, Maya. And Paul Gleeson, Managing Director of Energy Resources and Water at Oricon. Now, before we get started, we're just going to take some questions also from the audience today. And you can also ask your questions via Pigeonhole if you haven't already got the app. The link and the passcode details are going to be on the screen right above us here. And you can also vote for some of the questions that have been asked by also liking them. Alternatively, at the end, you'll also have an opportunity to ask your questions in person. What I'd like to ask you to do is just to please raise your hand and a microphone will be brought to you. Please state your name and the organisation that you're representing so that we all know who you are, and to be able to give an opportunity for all of us to say as much as and answer the questions from the panel, please try to keep your questions brief. So let's get going, and to be able to start our conversation, I might just ask Maya and Paul to just make a few words about what's really keeping the hydrogen debate really exciting and why now. So please, Maya, share your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much. Our analysis also shows that Queensland has what it takes to win in the hydrogen industry, and I won't repeat what the many very eloquent speakers have said before me. I would like to just pick up, though, on a point the Minister made about the similarity to the space race and draw out maybe two points on that, because I think it is a very, very apt analogy. The first is the framing. Absolutely, Queensland is competing against New South Wales, and it always will, and will win, by the way. But actually, the space race is about pulling together to win in a global competition. This is all of us in this room together, pulling together to launch this industry, to pull every single lever we've got at our disposal in order to be globally competitive. But it's us against the world. And so really the degree of collaboration, the degree of shared planning, the degree of shared infrastructure that's required is unprecedented and possibly different from those industries that we've built in the past. So I think that framing of a global space race is really apt in that regard. And the second thing I'd highlight is the benefits. In the same way that the space race gave us Teflon and microwaves, the hydrogen race has the potential to really change the game for Queensland, and especially in our regions. So it means cheap, plentiful power for everybody, not just electrolyzers. It means at least 30 years of straight renewable build-out. So that's not one construction project or one job. That's 30 years rolling across our state. And by the end of those 30 years, we're ready to start building again, let alone all of the supply chain opportunities and the industry that comes in serving hydrogen or those other applications, which are really where those long-term, highly skilled jobs are, and again, all in our regions. So I just think that the analogy is perfect, and let it help us frame the opportunity from the hydrogen industry as so much bigger than just that little molecule.
I'll build on that, Maya, thank you. And I think one of the key messages that I was keen to get across is that there definitely is a huge prize here for Queensland and for Australia. In that export economy, but it's important to have both that end goal in mind and then all the different steps that we're going to be undertaking this decade towards getting there. And when I say that, it's because I think a lot of us, myself included, started out on the hydrogen journey very focused purely on the export prize, which is really sizable. But more and more of our work is actually on the demand side and working with businesses who are based here and trying to figure out how they decarbonise their operations. And more the work we're doing is showing that hydrogen and ammonia are likely the answer to some of those problems. And so to understand that there'll be many scales of project that get underway this decade, we're all aiming towards that gigascale, getting a slice of the global hydrogen economy. But we're also going to get a lot of value out of doing things locally, getting everyone used to the product, how to handle it, how to store it, how to transport it, getting our communities and regions comfortable with having it stored nearby. Those are all really valuable things. And also to understand that, look, obviously economics are crucial. It's energy, that's always the case. But let's also remember why we started on the journey. So this is about decarbonisation. And yes, of course, as a fuel, it has to be competitive, and it will be. But I guess I reflect on, the journey that I had heavily involved in the federal government solar flagships program back in 2009. And I can remember a number of large-scale solar projects that came forward for that were chasing well north of $200 a megawatt hour to get up. And you look at where we are now, 12 years later, and you've got projects at a quarter of that are actually making a margin. That's a very short period of time. So when we talk about, the mythical $2 a kilo, that's an end goal, but we're going to start long before it's at that point, and that's really, I think, really key for everyone to remember that. And maybe that's one for those barbecue conversations, but if we keep coming back to that slightly Australian view of talk to me about it when it hits the break-even point, we will have missed the race. So we want to get started now. That's the key message.
I want to start with this race, and we know that the race is really, really tough. We know that it's not just the race between our states, but it's also the race between our countries. We're seeing countries that we probably wouldn't have been competing in races like Morocco and others to now be going into this race. Minister, I'd like to start with you. What is it that we can do, and particularly given the industry and how much interest there is in hydrogen, how is it that we can be competitive and really win in that race?
Well, thank you very much for that excellent question, and I think it's exactly what we're doing here today. It's about considering that it is really Australia versus the rest of the world, and that it is Queensland's opportunity to lead our nation and pull our nation up and get it into gear to deliver on this. It will only be with, as I described it before, that sort of NASA-esque focus, and it is going to take many, many years to do that. I do think that the work that Paul, for instance, has done around looking at the heavy haulage and the transport system is going to be fundamental on our pathway to doing that. I do think, though, that we need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. So we have to start building out that domestic demand in the transport sector, and at the very same time we've got to start those processes like Origin and Stanwell have both done in terms of building out our export ambitions. And so we're going to have multiple streams going, and I think it's going to be very important for our state and everybody involved in this task to have real confidence that they have governments that are absolutely supportive of that vision. That's why the Premier appointed me as the world's first Minister for hydrogen. I like to talk, taking the mission to the moon analogy. I like to think about myself as the Neil Armstrong and Alana McTiernan in Western Australia as the second guy, Buzz Aldrin, and nobody remembers who the third guy was. There's Mike Collins, that's right. Those demonstrations of commitment to what it's going to take in terms of making sure we've got the renewable energy to get us there are critically important, and I'm hopeful that the sort of commitment that you're seeing out of Queensland starts to rub off on our Commonwealth government as well.
Wow, well, I don't know where to take that comment back, but I'll hold. So I guess one of the things has also been the product, what is the hydrogen product and what is it that we're selling? And we've seen the Bloomberg announcement saying that for countries like Japan, which, Dr. Finkel has said would be very much a big off-taker for our market, have seen that, with that study saying it's actually for Japan, they are better off buying ammonia for ammonia case as opposed to buying hydrogen. Now, obviously, that puts many business models under question. What's the panel's view on that? Maybe Maya, I'll get you to answer that one.
Did you mean Tracey? Yeah. So it's funny, actually, in Origin, we're working on 2 export projects. So there is the liquid hydrogen project from Townsville, and we also have a green ammonia project from Bell Bay in Tasmania. And there are 2 project teams, and there is a very live debate over this. In fact, they like to send each other articles and CC me just to try and kind of see who can win the most points. I think where we've gotten to is that it's actually just not, it's still not very clear-cut, to be honest. There are pros and cons of both. Liquid hydrogen requires liquefaction and then regasification at the other end. Ammonia requires synthesis with nitrogen and then splitting at the other end. And as part of that, there can be some waste products that we need to figure out how to deal with those waste products. But the infrastructure exists for nitrogen, so that's kind of a plus for nitrogen. For ammonia. For liquid hydrogen, the infrastructure needs to be built, right? The ships are going to be new, all of the infrastructure is new, so they have their own challenges, but then they don't have that waste product at the end. So I think the jury's out for us. We'll keep progressing all sorts of carriers and let the debate continue.
Okay, thanks, Tracey, because I think obviously the whole industry is really trying to get to the bottom of that. And Maya, sorry, that question was for you. What are your thoughts on that? You know, what is the product that, you know, Australia is going to be a leader in?
Honestly, we are mostly focused on providing the globally competitive energy to fuel any product, and I guess we're very much focused on providing what the big industrial and commercial users of energy in Queensland need to go on their own decarbonization journeys. So, you know, offering 24/7 firmed, reliable, low emissions energy at globally competitive costs. And honestly, that's probably more important to us than exactly what it's used for, because I think there's hydrogen and there's ammonia, but there's also, you know, green minerals, green metals, the incredible bounty that we have in the Northwest Minerals Province, and how we translate that into batteries here in Queensland, for example. So we're really focused on a customer-by-customer basis, delivering that globally competitive, firmed, low-emissions energy to make whatever product our customers need.
And of course, funding plays a really big role in being able to get these projects up and going. I want to sort of just obviously highlight and congratulate Arena for that. Where do you see then the funding requirements to get us over the next short term? And obviously, Tracey also spoke about the 4 Cs, but there's also another C word that was kind of ruminating at the back of many of our minds, which is the carbon tax, and how do we feel about funding for the future? What are your panel's thoughts on the role for funding for projects, and what does the industry need? Maybe Darren, I'll get you to answer that.
Yeah, I think that you know, what we've committed to date is not sufficient. We're going to have to do more, but it's a good first step, and it allows us to get underway. Talking about a race, I think the gun went off a little while ago, and I don't think we're stuck on the line. I think we're up with the pack at the moment. So we're going to have to see what's required, what other countries commit, and I think one of the key questions is going to be, you know, if you look at the history of solar, for example, Germany spent a fortune on subsidising solar to get that underway in a country that's got half the sun of Australia, but took that step, and thankfully they did, because China picked up the manufacturing, and now we've inherited the low-cost panels, and we can do that at scale here. And I guess there's a similar question with hydrogen. What is our role going to be? Are we just a place where the electrolysers, you know, at the end of the letter says, please send to Minister Brenni, it arrives on his doorstep and we plug it in? Or are we actually going to do more? Are we going to build some of those components, or we're going to do things in a smarter way? And that's an open question for everybody. Well, we don't know what the answer is, and what is Australia's ambition in the whole hydrogen supply chain, all the way back to the innovation and the manufacture of the equipment that then manufactures the molecule.
Excellent response, Darren, and thank you for your presentation before. I think I want to speak on Queensland's behalf anyway. Our ambition is absolutely to build out a hydrogen value chain here in our nation, and primarily here in Queensland. When you think about other nations that have declared themselves as genuine superpowers, I think it's a little bit disingenuous for us to declare ourselves as a renewable energy superpower because we've just gone and bought things and stuck them on our roofs and put them on the top of hills and said, look, we're a superpower. I think if we want to be a real superpower, like the United States was when it was an automotive superpower, you build everything on site from scratch. That's what makes you a genuine superpower, and there's no reason that we can't have that happening here in Australia, except for making sure that we can get it down to commercial viability. And I think with enough dedication, vision and good old-fashioned ingenuity, we can deliver that here in Queensland, in Australia. I do think it's worth mentioning, though, in terms of the funding support for this through the sort of post-COVID stimulus opportunity. We put on the table the $145 million for our 3 renewable energy zones. We declared a $500 million renewable energy fund. Some of you have been invited to Townsville on Thursday for an Energy Futures Forum. I think the Premier of Queensland is going to have more to say about what more Queensland can do. But we saw very little come out of the Commonwealth budget on this. We saw $1 trillion in debt and really nothing to show for it anywhere in the nation except for the initiatives through the Home Builder program, which have more or less left the building industry on its knees in what they're calling a profitless boom. And so I think there is a bit of a missed opportunity there. And so for our part in Queensland, we're going to look very hard at how we can continue to fill that gap. Because at these early stages, we want to be there. We want to step up to the plate. We want, obviously, as much of ARENA's money to come into Queensland as possible. But we are going to have to put our shoulder to the wheel from a funding perspective, but also have that value chain. Because that's truly what's going to deliver the long-term jobs for Queensland. It's also why we're building the Hydrogen Centre of Excellence down at Beenleigh. We've got a centre in TAFE up in North Queensland. We've got a high school in Gladstone where we're developing those skills. So we don't want to see electrolysers arriving from Germany and being plugged in. We want to see them being made here by Queenslanders with components made from our own metals locally. So that is our ambition.
Well, hear to that. I also want to say that your comment earlier is we are ready, and Queensland is ready for prosperity for all Queenslanders. Is obviously a powerful message. In terms of the skills though needed, and obviously the transition is obviously an important question, particularly the industries that are already currently underway. Do some of the panellists have some views? Perhaps Origin, Tracey, what do you think the industry needs to upskill on, and where are the areas or the gaps in skill shortages?
Yeah, so I think one positive for Queensland for sure is the learnings that we've had through the development of the LNG industry, right? There are a lot of parallels there. So while hydrogen is a different product, in terms of core skills, there is a lot of alignment there. And I think that when you look around the regions as well and you look at where these projects are, so one part of this supply chain is the actual production of hydrogen, but there's the whole rest of the supply chain as well. So there's all manner of trades and engineering skills required in there, and a lot of them are existing. So I think I don't think that part of the transition is as hard as we might think. And I think that the bit that I touched on in my intro comments was around the decarbonisation of other industries here. And when you look at the potential that we've got out of precincts like Mount Isa to be supplying a whole lot of, we'll call them minerals of the future, the buyers for those products expect them to have zero embodied carbon. That's where they're going. They're going into EVs, they're going into other products like that. So you've also got to think about the jobs that we can create here by using hydrogen to decarbonise all the processing of those minerals, all those things there. It all ties together. And I think that's one of the great things about the task force is that there definitely seems to be a real systems thinking approach going in there, which we absolutely need.
I'll add to that as well. I think there's a couple of streams of job creation opportunities here. Obviously, when you think about multi-gigawatt electrolysers and liquefaction, if we compare the scale of the Curtis Island workforce, I think there was something in the vicinity of around 15,000 workers there for 4 or 5 years. If we're going to meet the ambitions that we've all talked about, we're going to need a scale of that sort of workforce of 15,000 trade-based qualified people in places like Gladstone and Townsville sort of between 2023, 24, right up until about 2030. So there's that big workforce that's going to need to be delivered in those locations. But I think the real opportunity for us here, when we think about jobs, is in places like Sun Metals and the smelter in Gladstone. Those sorts of currently carbon emission heavy industries that are desperate to decarbonise. We know that renewable energy supported by our hydrogen ambitions will enable us to be able to do that. And so when you think about a hydrogen job, it's not just about in the deployment of hydrogen, it's what hydrogen in our whole ecosystem as part of a renewable energy ecosystem will deliver. So all of those traditional jobs will continue, and I think critical for one of our streams of thinking that the task force is working on is what is our load attraction strategy? What are those big businesses around the world that are stuck with carbon intensive energy that we can actually invite here to our shores to employ Queenslanders? I think that's probably the biggest job creation opportunity for us.
That's fantastic to hear, and I guess one of the other questions that come to mind around that is around how do we see immediate usages for hydrogen today, and obviously it's a no-brainer with gas. Interested in the panellists' comments on sort of the role for gas to play, not just within the existing gas pipelines in Queensland, but also in the role for gas and hydrogen to exist together.
I can, maybe I'll make a start, and then Paul, if you want to jump in, probably spend some time thinking about it. So we're partnering with Gemina at the moment in the Western Sydney Green Gas Project, where they're looking to blend 10% hydrogen into their gas network. So we've provided the renewable energy for that, and we're getting the data from that as well to look at how we can do that on a larger scale. And so I think pending results from that, of course, there is an opportunity to do that at a bigger scale. Difficult to get to more than 20% without changing out appliances and so on, so maybe park that kind of thought. And then when we look at generation of energy, speaking to a Korean customer, actually a potential future Korean customer just yesterday, they're looking at technology that would have 30% hydrogen blended in with gas to produce power by sort of 2025 and increasing to 100% from 2030.
That's great. I guess I want to prepare you for questions if you want to raise your hands up so a microphone can come to you. And as we're doing that, I'll just have one more question. And that is a question here from you in the panel here around what is the relationship between water and hydrogen? Obviously, we know 9 litres makes a kilogram. What does that mean in a country like ours? Obviously, the droughts and the shortages of water we have. What's the panel's view on that?
I think the opportunity to look at wastewater as part of our hydrogen production chain, I think, is critically important to that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's definitely one of the big factors at the moment going into the siting studies, looking at where to put these things. Water's probably the key determinant at the moment. And of course you can produce it from desalination and other things, but each one of those has their trade-offs. So you're right, it is a factor, but all the modelling that's been done by CSIRO and others shows that it's definitely manageable, but it needs coordination. And I think that was one of the themes as well from before that I wanted to kind of wedge in there was we definitely have advantages in a hydrogen economy, Australia and Queensland in particular, but they're not exclusive advantages. They're sort of like this much. We've still got to actually go after this and coordinate everything and have a plan, have the end goal in mind and go at that now. I think that's important for everyone to understand because definitely the renewable resource is awesome. The access to deep water shipping is great, the trading relationships, proximity to Asia. But that's not enough to say it'll just naturally land on our laps.
Any other comments on that one? Someone did once tell me that if you think the National Electricity Rules is complex enough, bear in mind that any of the water schemes is even more complex. So I don't want to know how much coordination is going to be involved and how complex that's going to be, but it's obviously something that we need to get right. The other way that we need to think about it is that we need to convince investors that we are getting it right and we are doing it right. So I guess leaning into that, then what is the role for private investment in this space? Obviously, it is there's a lot of liquidity in the market for hydrogen projects. What are you seeing over there, Darren?
Well, it's crucial that the private market invests alongside government. Government can fill the gap when things are uneconomic, but we need similar commitment from industry. And certainly in the projects that ARENA supports, we have a general requirement that we don't put more than 50% of the money into a project. And the closer to commerciality that project gets, the less and less ARENA's contribution is. So for something like the GenX project, commercial technology, we just hadn't done pumped hydro in the country for 35 years. ARENA was, 47 million of an $800 million project. But in the early stages, in the R&D, and certainly in the 3 electrolysers that I mentioned that we're supporting with $103 million, we're actually slightly above 50% there. So it does require a commitment from both parties. And without that sort of skin in the game, it's not a serious thing. So industry and government need to come together to fund these things.
I'd add to that in terms of what government can do to encourage that investment to come to Queensland in particular. So just a couple of things. On our task force, our hydrogen task force, Queensland's Coordinator General plays a role in that, a terrific senior public servant in Queensland that can make sure that projects are delivered with incredible speed compared to where they are in other states and other nations. And that's a unique advantage that I think international investors are looking at Queensland as the place to come with their capital. And the other thing I think I want to plug again is the Queensland Jobs Fund. So when those private equity wants to come and do business in Queensland, we're going to welcome them in a very streamlined way, in a uniform way, through a single door, where access to the people that they need to meet with and the decision makers that they need to put their proposals to in Queensland are very, very clear. And I think meeting the work that ARENA does on its side and meeting that investment arm, simplifying those processes, returning to those proponents a very critical thing, which is time and ease of doing business, I think is something incredibly important that we can contribute to that.
Can I tease that out, particularly around the area of certification? We've seen the federal government try to work around that. We're still waiting. What's your view on sort of how quickly can we get certification up and going, and given the role that it plays, obviously, in being able to authenticate the source of the hydrogen?
I'm going to claim ignorance on that one because I think I'm not across exactly what's happening in the certification side, but I will comment on sort of the colours of hydrogen. We've heard of blue, we've heard of green. Someone mentioned pink today. I think that might have been a joke, but we've got all the colours of the rainbow on hydrogen. I actually think it's more important we find a common intensity measure, because ultimately these things are going to blend together. If you take one of the projects that I'm quite familiar with, the URI project with Yara up in the Pilbara, we're building a starting point, a 10 megawatt electrolyser that's going to blend hydrogen into the ammonia production facility, and it's going to join what's a grey hydrogen stream from steam methane reforming. So I don't know what happens when you have 98% grey and 2% green, what colour that is, but if we just call it 2% zero carbon hydrogen, and then you can certify the end product. I think that's actually the better way to go. Use the decimal system, not the colour wheel for hydrogen. Would be quite an innovation, I think.
For those not familiar with the colour chart, so hydrogen colours are pretty much every day you're hearing of a new colour, but just for technical. So obviously we've got green hydrogen, which everyone knows is basically created via renewables. You've also got obviously grey hydrogen, and then you've got blue hydrogen, which basically use carbon capture and storage to deal with the emissions used from grey hydrogen. It's been really interesting being able to work through that, and we've now even got pink hydrogen, yellow hydrogen, and I think I've covered all the colours. Did I? Okay, look, to wrap up like a last question, obviously we know hydrogen, very, very topical. Everybody is working on how to make it economical and how to get there and how to get through the race. Is it exportable? Is it usable within our economy? Final remarks, or is it just a me hype?
Yes, it is usable within our economy. It's usable very, very soon within our economy. Yes, it is exportable around the world. I think we have a terrific opportunity here in Queensland and Australia, but more than that, we have a quite remarkable responsibility to help the world decarbonise. So leading Australia from Queensland, absolutely.
Yep, likewise, it's definitely happening, and I think one of the key messages as well to make it a success is for everyone to calm down a little bit on saying, is it this colour or that colour? Is it going to be shipped as ammonia or hydrogen? There are so many use cases for this product. It'll actually go in multiple forms in multiple places, and that's okay.
Excellent. I'd say electrification is the way to go for a lot of decarbonisation, but there's about 16% of Queensland's carbon emissions that can only be mitigated or avoided via hydrogen. So it will play a role no matter what. And then I think, we, to your point, Minister, I think have the obligation to use the incredible gifts in our own backyard to supply not just our own, but the world as well. So to make use of that sunshine, but also our extremely valuable wind to deliver ultimately a globally competitive energy cost, input cost of that hydrogen, and use it to the world. So I think a real tipping point has been reached just in the last few months in terms of the world's interest and ambition in hydrogen.
I'll just make two comments on the question. Firstly, the current cost of shipping liquefied hydrogen, we think, to Japan is about $2 a kilogram. So it doubles the cost. If we can produce it for $2, and I think we can get there, it's going to double the cost to $4 a kilogram to get it to Japan, unless we solve through some kind of innovation, how do we ship that? So that's a challenge, but the flip side is there's huge uses for hydrogen locally. So one example being green steel. Currently, we have iron ore in the Pilbara, Queensland, South Australia, gets put on ships, and then we dig up coal, met coal, and we send that to China, and they use the coal and the iron ore to make steel. Now, if we're switching to hydrogen, you're not going to ship hydrogen and ship iron ore for it to be done overseas. You're going to do it all in Australia. It's not just a wish, it's a technical impossibility to compete successfully unless we do that. So we're going to produce vast amounts of hydrogen to produce pure iron, which will either turn into steel here, but more likely shipping pure iron offshore for steel mills, specialised steel overseas. So one industry could dwarf every other use case, but there's actually about 10 use cases. So it's a real opportunity for Australia to produce hydrogen and use it locally and ship a high-value product overseas.
And last comments from you, Tracey.
Yeah, I think we get asked this sometimes, and I think what I'd point to is global momentum. And I know that hydrogen has been tried before, but this feels like the first time that actually so much funding has been applied to it. It's appearing in so many global roadmaps. We will get there. I remember starting off in the energy industry about 15 years ago, and everyone laughing at wind and solar and saying, oh, look at it. It's only on 30% of the time. It's never going to work. And look at it now, right? And I think the same will be true for electrolyzers and hydrogen for sure.
Yeah, and we look forward to that. So look, on behalf of all of us here today, I'd really like to thank all the panellists. This is such a powerful discussion, not just for the energy transition, but for obviously the Queensland economy and our nation as a whole. So wish you all the best in the year ahead with all your transition plans. And I'd like to hand over to Clint O'Brien from CEDA to close off today's proceedings.
Mega panel, you are very welcome to go and enjoy your dessert before we wrap up if you like quickly, or of course you can stay sitting there. I firstly wanted to thank all of you. We have been overwhelmed with questions on the Pigeonhole app. I think it's a demonstration of how much interest and a thirst for knowledge and information there is in this space, and testament to how many people have joined us today, of course, as well. So thank you, and thank you to all of our participants who prepared, who travelled, who made the time and the effort for being here today and speaking to CEDA members, so thanks all very much. Before we do go, I just wanted to let you know that a couple of discussions that are not removed from some of the topics we've been talking about here today that CEDA will undertake coming up are firstly an energy and climate series of boardroom briefings that will hold around the country in August, and also the first public address from AEMO's incoming Chief Executive on the CEDA stage in Sydney, which we will beam out nationally in July. Up next here in Brisbane, though, we have on Monday the 21st the Treasurer's State Budget Address, of course, with 600 of our nearest and dearest right here in this room. So if you haven't made your booking for that yet, please do so. We still have some capacity left. And then in August, we'll also have our senior economist, Gabriella De Sousa, who will be in town and briefing on CEDA's recommendations around tweaks to the migration system. If you caught Gabby on Q&A last Thursday night, the Thursday night before, you'll know she's pretty impressive. And for CEDA trustees, those of you with the red name badges are CEDA trustees. You're very welcome to get in touch if you'd like to attend and participate in that roundtable. That's it for today. That's it for us. Thank you all for being here and supporting the work of the Committee for Economic Development of Australia. Go well, remember Darren's advice, use the decimal system, and have a good afternoon. Cheers.